So who wants to talk Hasbro Street Fighter with me? If you've been watching Articulated Points for a while, you may have already seen Philip and I discuss the G.I.Joe Street Fighter action figures. But at that point, we really mostly just discussed what was released. And we have some more information, so I thought that we'd dig into that today. As a quick recap, there was a line of Street Fighter II figures released as a segment of the G.I. Joe brand in 1993, and then in 1994 there was a Street Fighter movie toy line that reused a bunch of G.I. Joe parts along with a few new things and some redecos, and I would kind of like to talk about all of these things, starting with the first assortment in 1993. Now, much later, I am going to make a point regarding the assortment numbers, so diving into things that way, first, within the G.I. Joe segment Street Fighter II, we have assortment number 1, which is 6238. You can easily see what assortment a figure was a part of because it's written on their package. Mock-ups for this wave were made relatively public due to the fact that some appeared in the vehicle insert catalog while others were on the packages. But let's again use the higher res photos from the 1993 Toy Fair catalog. This first wave included Ryu. The mock-up here used Quick Kick's head because the Ryu sculpt was not ready yet. Guile. This placeholder was created using the head of Bulletproof and the body of mail-in Sergeant Slaughter. Chun-Li's Toy Fair catalog mock-up was simply a repainted Scarlet with added hair buns. Blanca here is just a repainted Road Pig with additional hair. M. Bison used Red Star's head and hat because just like the rest of these, his new head sculpt was not ready. Ken Masters. Of course, this head is from Downtown, since Ken's head was not available yet. This one's the most interesting of the group because of his name in the Toy Fair catalog. Here you see, Street Fighting Martial Arts Warriors join the G.I. Joe world. M. Bison, Blanca, Guile, Ryu, Chun-Li, and... This isn't a typo. In order to avoid issues with character from another popular toy line, Hasbro could not release this figure simply as Ken. Hasbro added the surname Masters, which seems to have become canonical for later games and stories. Also in the Street Fighter II segment of the G.I. Joe line, there were vehicles and playsets with figures. Now, if you were unaware, the original Street Fighter II video game didn't allow two players to use the same character. The Champion Edition and later versions did. This is why collectors sometimes call the redecos the Player 2 colors, and Hasbro refers to them as the Championship Edition figures. Here's the Beast Blaster with Championship Edition Blanca and Chun-Li. Obviously, the vehicle is different than what was released. It looks like some of the armor here is burgundy, like the Thunder Machine that this was repainted from already was. But the weapons on the front are also color swapped. The box back depicted the earlier missile launcher, but with the finished black doors and roof. There you can also see the Player 2 figures made the same way as the standard release figures. I still find it interesting that instead of the single Blanca being green and this one blue, the Toy Fair catalog shows them in two different shades of blue. Note that the carded Blanca's art also showed him in a shade of blue. It just leads me to think that there really wasn't a green Blanca planned to begin with, and that they realized that they needed to do something about the fact that one was blue and the other one was just another blue. Next we have the Crimson Cruiser, known in the earlier Toy Fair catalog as the Street Buffalo, and it comes with Championship Edition M. Bison. While the mock-up of the carded figure used the Red Star head and hat, this one appears to instead use those of General Flag. Again, the color depicted on the file card is very different than the figure released. Here's that engineering pilot seen in our last episode that includes a red with blue hat, called out on the green tag for correction. So it wasn't released this way, but this was a sample that was sent to Hasbro, and the green tag was used to inform the factory of what changes to make. I still haven't found any differences on existing flesh tones for this figure as it was instructed in writing. Here's the Sonic Boom Tank with Championship Edition Guile. Guile looks more orange than brown in the file card art. His pants are even like a base of white, but the mock-up shown is in different shades of brown, just like the figure that was released. I was going to skip over the black marks on his legs, but they probably need to be addressed. This package would have been made with separate photos layered together and combined on a cohesive black background. It appears that while someone filled in the spaces in the photo of the tank treads with that black background, a mistake was made that placed the figure under that layer instead of on top of it. Next is a Dragon Fortress, which is a repaint of parts of the Toxo Lab, along with some new pieces. The art for the two characters actually swaps the colors that they ended up being released in. And still avoiding calling a certain character by name, the Toy Fair catalog labels the included figures as Championship Edition Ryu and Championship Edition Figure. This mock-up of Ken used the head of Chuckles instead of Downtown like the mock-up of the carded figure did. And here we can see the FEP sample of Ken that had black details instead of red and a white belt. I have almost two of these. Emphasis on the almost. And what's interesting is that they came in a lot of parts from a former Hasbro employee, and that lot actually included this piece. I wonder what they may have been doing with the head from that Ken and shattering pieces that looked like this at the time to crack this body open. Could they have been perhaps making a mock-up of some kind? We didn't cover Street Fighter 12-inch figures last time, so I'd like to just kind of touch on that a little here. The first wave consisted of Ryu and M. Bison. Here you can see an input drawing of Ryu's head sculpt that surfaced online many years ago. Then Dan Klinget-Smith Jr. recently posted sculpt input drawings for several 12-inch Street Fighters on the Pre-Pro Facebook group. This Ryu may be a revision, as it was dated just one day later than the Ryu we just saw. Ryu and M. Bison were later joined by Guile and Blanca, released in Wave 2. The Blanca sculpt notes, hair on the head will be that of the type used by trolls. That was a really good call for the toy, and I appreciate that it was actually phrased that way on the sculpt input. Guile's input was done in October of 1992, along with the other three. Here is that drawing. And that does it for 1993. In December of 1994, Street Fighter the movie was released to cinemas starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. And if you haven't noticed, I'm actually wearing a borrowed costume from that movie. And as a part of the excitement, Hasbro released an entire line of figures. We'll discuss the 3 3/4-inch figures in a moment, but since we were just talking about 12-inch, I thought that we'd start with the 12-inch figures first. While 3 or more figures were planned, only the Jean-Claude Van Damme Guile was released. Now I have to hope that the original Guile here, pictured for the Street Fighter movie line, was just a mock-up because it looks really weird. It's quite similar, except for the head, to the body of the one that was released. Now, there is further evidence that there was a planned new sculpt for a 12-inch Guile. This came to us thanks to our departed friend Gary Goggles' head. Many years ago, he found and shared this Hasbro internal image that shows several 12-inch heads, including an unused one labeled Guile. A new Ryu and M. Bison were also planned for the movie line and can be seen in the Toy Fair catalog. While Bison is shown in black, a sample that can be found on eBay is in red. But you'll note that the box seen there is just a mock-up. It is simply a reused Guile box with a liner from something else entirely, placing it somewhat early in development. Looking to other Hall of Fame figures, it was common for 12-inch pre-production samples to use older or entirely different colored fabrics when testing the patterns, so it's likely that black was always the intended color for the figure to be wearing. But the sample also shows us two other interesting details. For one, the figure has a cape. And for another, you can also see that this M. Bison would have had a new head sculpt. The Toy Fair catalog used the old head sculpt, but you can see the drawings here. And the Bison sample on eBay is not alone. Also listed is a sample for the new Ryu. There you can see his new head sculpt. And these gauntlets are also new. Here is the movie Ryu drawing, not entirely unlike the originals. Among the other images that Dan posted, you could see the gauntlet drawings as well. But what is even more significant is that the drawing indicates that these gauntlets are intended for both movie Ryu and movie Ken. Looking at the rest of the page reveals the inputs for Sagat's shorts and wraps. That brings us, of course, to the head for Sagat. And this sculpt for Ken brings us to a total of 4 known, cancelled 12-inch Street Fighter the movie figures. Moving on to the 3 3/4 movie line, I'd like to point out that they were originally called World Warriors or The World Warrior. And that appears in the Toy Fair catalog, even on the same page in the catalog. Assortment number 1 of the Street Fighter movie toys is number 6152. The Edmund Honda pictured here is simply the original figure, being used probably as a stand-in because it is not new at all. Blanca is a resin, as you can see his feet don't even have peg holes yet. Victor Sagat has been repainted to have red shorts. Ken Masters has an all-new body, and we'll talk about this Guile later. He wasn't included in this figure assortment. And then there's the hand-painted General M. Bison. This one's the most interesting among these in my opinion. Like Ken, everything is new except the head. Instead of having silver shoulders like the finished figure, these are painted red, and he has that odd blue patch of paint on the left bicep. You can see the gradual stages of production starting with a test shot. It uses a head from an existing Bison toy, which explains why that head is fully painted, yet the body is unpainted because they were testing all of the new parts. Next is an engineering pilot similar to the painted resin in the catalog that has red shoulders and that blue bicep paint. I really don't know why that's there. Here's two different engineering pilots that both have painted hands instead of being made of glow-in-the-dark plastic. There's one with light blue hands and the other with dark blue, but neither glow as well as the figure that was released. Finally, this figure seems to be unfinished. You can see where a cape could have been added later to the holes in the back. The test shot and first EP did not yet have these holes. So while this is simply an unfinished figure, I think it's handy for a comparison of what changes were made to the body. After Assortment 1, you'd think that we'd move right into Assortment 2, but no, before that we actually got the Guile assortment, which is number 6193. As we mentioned before, these were interesting because, like the released set, they reused parts from existing G.I. Joe figures, but several of the parts selected were different in the 1995 pre-Toy Fair catalog when compared to what was released. The Night Fighter and Navy SEAL even depicted accessories from Kenner's Jurassic Park toy line. The Night Fighter bow even made it to retail, so I have to wonder if that Dennis Nedry water squirter would have actually been included with a figure if they could have found it or if they could have used it. Why wasn't that included if the bow was? Here is Paratrooper Guile, Arctic Assault Guile, Night Fighter Guile, and Navy SEAL Guile, and then at a glance, Sonic Boom Guile may appear to be the first Guile, but with a new Van Damme head, but at a closer look, this is actually the body of the Guile we just saw moments ago. This new body does not have an O-ring, and is constructed in a way that's similar to the Ninja Force Snake Eyes. It appears several times throughout the catalog. Then we have Rock Trooper Guile. This one is the figure that has caused my imagination to run the most wild. While the image simply shows a dusty figure with a new movie Van Damme head and different accessories, pre-production photos have appeared online that depict the figure in a redeco. It causes me to wonder what other new colors were prepared for the rest of the figures in the image. And yet these images were not alone. Pictures also surfaced of the figure with a similar deco, but the figure was revised to use the parts that were available when Rock Fighter Guile was released. And now we have assortment number 2, number 6196. And included were Dhalsim, Zangief, Balrog, Chun-Li Zhang, and Vega, and cardbacks for both assortments depicted Ryu Hoshi. He also appeared in TV commercials, but the figure was not released. However, production samples have appeared online. You can see a loose one here. He's actually unlike anything in Ninja Force for the way that his mechanism works. His head is actually a button so that you can stick his leg out and it does an action similar to his hurricane kick from the game, which interestingly on the package mock-ups for this was referred to as the double dragon kick. And in a previous episode, I said that I thought that the wave with Ryu could have also included a couple of special Ken and M. Bison figures. Now that I look at the assortment numbers, I think that it's more likely that they would have come out later as well, but they would have simply been revisions within assortment number 1. You could see them here. Bison would have used the new movie head on the red body, and Ken is even more unfortunate to have missed, because this unreleased sample has a completely new head sculpt. For vehicles and playsets, let's start big and look at the Shadowloo headquarters with M. Bison. While the body of the released figure was the new movie sculpt, the catalog and box showed a repainted version 1 Bison, which is clear by the chipping paint. The packaging for the headquarters teases several characters who didn't appear in the toy line, including those who first appeared in Super Street Fighter II, a later edition of the game that was new for 1993 and included additional characters. I have to think, for the fact that these match the video game characters so well, that Hasbro probably wanted to eventually release these. I intentionally waited to talk about this figure 2-pack until now. You can see here that the Guile pictured is the same as the one shown for the carded Sonic Boom figure, but they were both unique redecos that used a retooled body of that Guile we saw earlier, along with, of course, a new head. Bison is very different since the hands do not glow, the armor is silver, and most notably, the head is the original one instead of the movie sculpt. What's really odd is the rough plan for the mini Dio included. It's called a Ninja Battle Arena on the mock-up, and a Shadowloo Battle Base on the finished product. You can see that it's roughly similar to the martial arts battle arena that was included with Shadowloo headquarters. What's funny is that the base under the mock-up figures is definitely that playset in a reduced scale. You can even see the miniature hand control panels from the sides of the champion's throne under Guile's feet. Or should I say Guile? Because that's what it says on the mock-up. Hey, typos happen. And the release base, of course, was made of plastic and was very different. And here's the Devastator with Special Edition Victor Sagat. I really don't have much to say about this, other than the fact that you can tell that the Sagat in there is hand-painted. Then we have the Street Striker, which is the favorite of this toy line for a lot of people, simply because it's based on the Vamp. It may be somewhat strange, but this vehicle didn't include a figure. The one shown in the Toy Fair catalog and on the back of the box included the cans and a body like those with the first Vamp, but instead it has the body of the Vamp Mark II. To make things even more confusing, the package art seems to be based on a model that used the Cobra Stinger. The Street Striker was available with either red or green missiles. And here's the Helifighter that included a Colonel Guile figure. I again kind of saved this item for later, and this is because the vehicle seems to have been released earlier in the line when the packaging didn't mention the movie, and instead was titled The World Warrior. Of particular interest to me is that package art. The face of Guile reminds me of more art that surfaced online. Designed in September of 1993, a new face for Guile was created for the Street Fighter movie line at Hasbro that did not utilize Jean-Claude Van Damme's likeness. The similarity is so striking that I have to think that the painting was created while using this new head's development for reference. If you want to know what this head would have looked like sculpted and painted, Brian Kaufman has you covered. Here are a couple of Street Fighter movie head sculpts that he picked up and kindly posted online. But that begs the question, what about the other characters shown on the box of the Helifighter? Cammy is pictured here as well as on the box of the headquarters. I doubt that Hasbro would have shown the Super Street Fighter 2 characters if they didn't at least hope to have them included in the toy line. But this Cammy painting seems to be a step further than the HQ art, since 1, it is a depiction that is not exactly characteristic of the way she looks in the game, and 2, her character was heavily featured in the movie, a fact that Hasbro would have likely known. Is there anything else out there for a Hasbro Cammy? I would really like to know, because this has me feeling like there probably is, but I haven't seen anything. So please, if there's anything else out there for this character, please post it, send us a comment. I really just want to see it. The Karate Chopper shown in the 1994 Toy Fair catalog is different than the one released, in that the windscreen is gray instead of the released white. But this is where things get really interesting, because in the spring 1994 catalog, an even earlier iteration was shown. Let's back up to what Hasbro was planning prior to the Street Fighter movie line. At this time, the items were still intended to be a segment of the G.I. Joe brand. This is not only evidenced by the G.I. Joe logo decal that did appear on the Karate Chopper box, and the logo on the box art, but also by the fact that the spring catalog still classifies them as a part of the Joe toy line. And here in that spring catalog, you can see that the Karate Chopper has decals in the same place as the ones on the released box back. Of course, the elephant in the room right now is the Ryu in a new color that is driving. As indicated below, this figure would have been included. Remember when I said that I would be referring back to these assortment numbers? Well, here it is. This catalog also lists assortment number 1, 6152, for Street Fighter 2 Turbo figures. This would have been an all-new assortment of figures within the G.I. Joe brand. Ken Masters and Sagat are the only two figures listed, but conveniently, 6152 also happens to be the same assortment number as the Street Fighter movie assortment 1 that did get released later than this plan. It's hard to know if the character lineup would have been the same, and I have to assume that Guile was pictured here prior to the plan to give the character his own wave. This part of the story gets even better thanks to the help of Adam Riches, who rescued 2 pieces of G.I. Joe Street Fighter 2 Turbo package mock-ups from obscurity by posting images of them to the G.I. Joe discussion group on Facebook. Here we can see E Honda. This makes a third Turbo figure that does match that lineup eventually found in movie assortment 1. I find this interesting because while the E Honda that was pictured with assortment 1 of the movie was actually the original G.I. Joe E Honda figure with red face paint, the figure pictured here on the mock-up package actually has the blue face paint like the movie E Honda. So clearly they had developed that movie figure for the Turbo line since it's finished and on a Turbo card in this picture. I have several FEP samples of Street Fighter figures. Of those, there are 2 E Honda samples, and both include accessories still attached to the runners, like the one seen in the G.I. Joe Street Fighter 2 Turbo packaging. The finished figure only included a few of those accessories, and they were not on the runners. The primary difference between both of these figures and the finished movie E Honda figure is the flesh tone. the finished figures actually had a slightly different flesh tone, and that actually remained the same for other figures within the Street Fighter movie line and the samples that I have, because I also have a Sagat with a lighter flesh tone, as well as a Ken with lighter flesh tone. And the Ken sample also comes with a full tree of accessories, which seems to be what was being planned for the Turbo line. Along with these, there was also a Blanka sample that had the shackles on his legs painted the same color as his skin, instead of being left brown as it was when it was released. The sample of the newly sculpted Guile also arrived in my collection along with these, so what is and is not a part of this G.I. Joe Turbo line is really hard to tell. Now may be a good time to show this mystery tree of accessories. It surfaced online and I haven't been able to place it, but one possibility is that it belongs with one of the figures that was intended for this segment, and that it was dropped whenever they switched them to the movie line. I don't think I've seen any use of this particular accessory sprue that has two of this exact knife on the same tree. It may have been used for something at some point that I'm unaware of. Maybe they broke the accessories off the sprue prior to packaging them. But I have definitely not seen one assembled like this in the G.I. Joe line or the Street Fighter line, or for that matter, Mortal Kombat. Adam also pointed out that the blue and black package design matches the way that the Street Fighter figures were presented in the 1994 vehicle insert catalog. Next, we have the mock-up for the Karate Chopper within the Street Fighter II Turbo line. You can see that the planned Ryu Redeco is depicted driving it, and is called out as included on the package. A direct comparison of the art reveals even more. When this was shifted from the Turbo line to the movie series, the Ryu art wasn't simply palette swapped. They actually repainted the feet to be bare, and removed the lower leg wraps. This helped make Ryu look more similar to the figure that wasn't released anyway, and I do find it interesting that while they were doing all this repainting, that they did not paint over that G.I. Joe logo. Now, all of this raises a lot of questions, but the biggest one probably for me is, if they were planning a Street Fighter II Turbo Assortment 1 for the G.I. Joe line, was there a plan for an Assortment 2? And there is an image that does give some indication that there was more work happening. Here we can see input drawings for new parts that would have been needed to update Zangief. The figure would have had new legs and a new upper torso. This could be for Assortment 1 or a second assortment. It's more likely that the assortment plan wasn't even ready whenever this was being created. While many people just disregard this segment of the G.I. Joe brand, I actually appreciate the variety of the characters that it offers. And I think that it suffered maybe a bit from the start, due to the fact that most of the characters existed so much of reused parts.
Oh, I like them!
But overall, I have to say that it's worth another look, because these are figures that are made by the classic G.I. Joe team at the time, and they also are great companion pieces in a collection. And with this big resurgence that we've been having in O-ring figures, I think that these are the figures that probably deserve another look from the past. So thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, please take a look at our others. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode, or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.